All right, we are live. Welcome, everyone. This is the first AMA of our Ask Swan AMA series. Thanks to everyone for attending live. Thanks for your great questions. We will send out a recording to everyone who registered tomorrow. We'll post this publicly in a couple weeks. Jimmy, thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Jimmy's the author of 2 books about Bitcoin, Programming Bitcoin, and the Little Bitcoin book. Also runs intense 2-day seminars that teach how to code in Bitcoin. We've got a lot of good questions for you from today, submitted from all over the world. We'll start with this one. It's very simple. David asks, why Bitcoin versus other coins?
Well, Bitcoin is the only one that's actually interesting to me. But I mean, you can make that subjective value judgment for yourself. Essentially, Bitcoin is decentralized. Everything else is playing decentralization theater. They're pretending to be decentralized, but really there's there's like one developer or a small group of developers, usually a creator involved. There's a foundation or somebody that has a control of a bunch of the funds to, direct the coin in some way, shape, or form. Or it's just got like proof of stake or something like that, which is a natural centralizing function. So the thing that makes Bitcoin different is that it is decentralized. Everything else is not. And if it's not, it's really no better than fiat money, like the US dollar or the euro or the yen or anything else.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense. Everything else is basically just fiat money, and you've written a lot on that subject. So Abdul asks, what are the key priorities for Bitcoin in 2020?
I think the biggest one is Taproot, and that's the one. That's the next soft fork that's going to happen in Bitcoin, I think is going to happen in Bitcoin. And certainly, there's been a lot of review on it, a lot of work on it over the past 6 to 12 months, and it goes back further than that if you think about like conceptually what we wanted to do and so on. But I mean, it's been a long road, but it's nearing sort of code completion, and then comes like a lot of actual code review, and then after that, we'll have to figure out some sort of consensus way to activate it. I think we've all been burned from Bit 9, so figuring that out is going to be a big part of this next soft fork. But that I would say definitely Taproot, Schnorr, and along with that, all of the upgrades that a lot of exchanges and wallets will want to do as a result, because there are certain really cool properties that you get out of Schnorr that I don't think people really realize yet. And
Yeah.
it's going to require some infrastructure upgrades pretty much everywhere.
Okay. Well, Corey asks a related question. Well, how do Taproot and Schnorr actually work, and how will they improve the protocol? So kind of getting into the specifics a little bit.
Yeah, so Taproot is, right now there are 2 kinds of addresses on the network broadly. There's 2 categories. You have a single pub key locked output. So this would be like pay to pub key hash, pay to witness pub key hash. Essentially, it's one key maybe on your Trezor or something like that that can unlock it. And then there's something called script hash, or more complicated stuff. This vast majority of those are multi-sig mostly, right? Like 2 of 3 or 3 of 5, something like that. But it's not locked to a single key. And sometimes it has time locks and multiple signers and so on, which a lot of Lightning uses. So you have a lot of different kinds of transactions, but it's pretty easy to tell which is which. You can tell which ones are pub key hash because the addresses start with a 1 or BC1 and end with and have a certain length. The other ones start with a 3, and unless it's pay to script hash wrap, pay to witness pub key hash. But essentially, it's pretty easy to tell. What Taproot does is it equalizes all of them. So you will always have a single key path and also a script path. So you can basically hide in a much larger anonymity set,
Right.
and nobody is the wiser as to what's required to unlock these coins or whatever. More than that, because we're combining it with Schnorr, you get some really interesting properties, like the single key path can actually be multi-sig, and that's an interesting innovation that we can get out of using something called music.
So people wouldn't
Essentially,
be able to tell between a single key path and a multi-sig path. It kind of
yeah, well,
hides.
even looking on the blockchain, you wouldn't be able to tell, because
Right.
as far as the blockchain is concerned, there's one signature, one pub key, so it thinks it's a single key. But really, in the background, it's actually 5 keys or 12 keys or 150 keys. It doesn't matter. You
Right.
can the thing is as good as however way you want to coordinate it. So. You get some of that. There's a lot more efficiency with Schnorr. You get aggregated. Not only aggregated signatures and aggregated pub keys that you can use around it, but block validation times reduce, because you can take all of the signatures from all of the transactions in a block and add them together and validate once,
Right on.
instead of having to validate for each transaction. So those are the main things that are coming from Schnorr and Taproot. You get basically you merge the two main use cases that we've seen in Bitcoin so far, which are pay to pub key hash and pay to script hash, and into something called Taproot, and that's going to be very useful. And you get some of the benefits of Schnorr, and with that sort of reduction in block usage per transaction and so on.
Nice. So efficiency gains, privacy gains, and yeah, I mean, there's always this assertion leveled, especially by altcoiners and no coiners, that Bitcoin just doesn't innovate, and on the base layer, and that's just not the case.
No, no. And one of the things that I think will become a thing once Taproot is out is sort of having a backup to your stuff. So right now, it's very scary, for example, for me to like give private keys to my mom or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because she might lose it, and then the Bitcoin's gone. It's done and
Yeah.
over with. Unless I keep a backup, in which case it's not really hers. Um, the way you can do that is with the script side of the Taproot tree. What you can do is you can designate some sort of backup solution. So if somebody loses their single key, then you can have something like, after 1 year, 3 of 5 of these people can help me recover, right? And those
Right.
5 people can be designated to be, like, yeah, I mean, you could do this now to some degree, but you have to pay an enormous cost in a very complicated script. With Taproot, you essentially get it for free, and the backup option only comes into play if you lose the key.
Wow.
So,
Nice.
like from a block space perspective, you get all of the benefits of a single pub key. Whenever you're using just a single pub key. But if you need to use the backup, well, you're kind of willing to pay more anyway. So I think that should become standard, and hopefully that increases the security for everybody, which I think is the much more important property anyway, because
Sure.
we're mostly using it for store value, and if you're using it for store value, security becomes like of utmost importance.
Yeah, absolutely. From Steven, he asks, do you think we'll see a contentious hard fork in Bitcoin's near future? And if so, what do you think it'll be over?
I don't see a contentious hard fork on the horizon. I could be wrong, but most of the people that wanted to hard fork left with the last one, and that was Bitcoin Cash. So, I mean, there have been disagreements, and there always will be, because you got such a diverse group of core developers and so on. But I mean, you could it's potentially maybe one of them could leave or whatever and go start their own coin, which of course they're free to do. But I don't necessarily think it'll be quite like Bitcoin Cash or anything like that. And like, at least in the near future, I don't see anything like that happening. It's much more common in other coins, I think.
Yeah. What do you think about privacy? The idea of putting confidential transactions or the like on the base layer, and possibly not being able to audit the supply any longer. Are there ways to improve privacy beyond obviously Taproot and Schnorr without compromising the ability to verify the supply?
Well, so there's a mathematical theorem about this. Essentially, it says that it's perfectly binding, and we're bound to 21 million right now,
Yeah.
or it's perfectly hiding. You leak no information when you transmit anything,
Right.
and that includes the amount, who it's to, who it's from, etc. Um, you can have one or the other, but not both.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, the perfect binding is what gives Bitcoin its sound money property. So that's much more important than that. Confidential transactions, at least at the current conception of it, is perfectly hiding. So that would take away the binding aspect, which I don't think I think is pretty much a non-starter. If there's a way to reduce some of the privacy properties and keep the perfect binding, then maybe it's a consideration. But I mean, Taproot does a pretty good job, honestly. Like
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to tell much until it gets spent and so on. And like if you try to hide in an anonymity set like Monero style or something like that, you end up having an infinite UTXO bloat, which you can't prune any UTXOs in Monero, which is one of the big problems with that. With with that coin. So you got to be able to run your own full node. Otherwise, you're really kind of trusting a third party. So I think perfectly binding is the way to go.
Yeah. And you think that that's, I mean, it seems to me that that's the prevailing opinion of Bitcoiners. So it doesn't seem to be very contentious
Yeah,
at
I
this
mean,
point.
there you can get confidential transactions on Liquid right now, and if you want
Yeah.
to, peg into Liquid and do something and then peg out again, I mean, you essentially have a lot of those privacy properties that you're looking for. Now, the anonymity set in Liquid isn't that great. I think there's right now like 350 Bitcoin locked up in there or something like that. Once that anonymity set gets bigger, then it starts becoming a lot more viable. So. But again, you got a trade-off because you have to trust the members of the Liquid Federation. I think there's 15 of them, and they're in different jurisdictions. You have to trust that 11 of you won't steal them from you. So there are all sorts of different trade-offs, and it's up to the user to figure out which one they want. But if you want privacy, it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there is a question about CoinJoin here. It's appropriately from an anonymous person. What do you think CoinJoin, the future of CoinJoin will be? Will Taproot or Schnorr make CoinJoins more effective?
Not Taproot or Schnorr specifically, but they are a step towards something else that I think will help CoinJoins quite a bit, and that is cross-input signature aggregation. So with Taproot and Schnorr, what you essentially have is per input signature aggregation. So if it's a 5 of 5, you can aggregate all 5 signatures into one signature and one pub key, making it look no different than a single sig. But you can't do it across multiple inputs. And essentially what a coin join is you have lots and lots of inputs and lots of outputs. That way you're mixing everything with each other. If you have cross input signature aggregation, what that means is that you have all of those inputs have a single signature. Now that's something really interesting because at that point, well, not only are you saving a lot of block space, but you're now incentivized to go do it.
Nice. Yeah.
And that economic incentive is gigantic because right now there isn't that much of an economic incentive to do a coin join. In fact, you have
Right.
to go and pay Samurai Whirlpool or a Wasabi wallet or whatever in order to do a coin join. At a certain point, when you have large anonymity sets like that, it'll be really interesting because it'll be just sort of best practice to instead spit out your own transaction, just give some coin joining thing a bunch of inputs and a bunch of outputs and sign when they tell you as to
Right.
piece.
Nice.
So that's the future of CoinJoin that I think we'll get to, and you'll be able to hide in some pretty large anonymity sets, I think. And I think what mining pools will start doing is they'll start their own CoinJoins and say, okay, well, we want to make this block as efficient as possible. So CoinJoin as much as you want in this one block, and we'll give this one giant transaction with just one signature for all of the inputs, and a bunch of other bunch of outputs, and that way you're hiding in essentially an entire block, which would be amazing.
Nice. That sounds great. And that's, I mean, not too far away. That's a relatively near future for Bitcoin. In the next couple of years, we should see that happen.
Well, maybe 3 or 4. I
3 or
mean,
4,
we
yeah.
have to get Taproot and Schnorr out first because they're sort of essential technology on this.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But at that point, then it becomes something that we can all do.
Nice. All right. Julian asks, for the Bitcoin network to stay secure, will it be necessary for hash power to keep increasing forever?
I don't think so. I mean, I suspect that it will anyway. But that's a really deep game theory question, because like the thing about mining equipment is that it tends to go bad, right? Like the parts break and you have to replace it and all that stuff. And they have a fixed life cycle typically because they're not expected to be used for all that long. I mean, like it's basically on 24/7. It's after a couple of years, it just sort of wears out all the parts or whatever. So even if you did have a large supply of hashing power in the past, that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have that at least that much power right now, because mining hash power goes bad. And depending on mining supply and so on, and the game theory behind that, it really depends. I could see, I think that is essentially what will happen, largely due to price increases in Bitcoin. But it doesn't necessarily have to do that. And in fact, it's happened where mining hash power has dropped 10-20% in a given period or something. You're muted.
Thank you. Last question on tech from Nikhil. What are the relatively safe ways to store keys other than a hardware wallet?
Well, I mean, there's I mean, if you want to go through it, it's a very difficult protocol. There's something called the Glacier protocol that you can use to store stuff. General multi-sig, I think, works pretty well. Unfortunately, there aren't that many wallets that are providing that, which is why I'm working on something. I like Casa has something, and I think Unchained Capital has something. But really, you want something that people can use. Most wallets just use sort of like the single key path as like the main way to do things. So you want something multi-sig if possible. It's not really the case right now. Hopefully with Taproot and Schnorr, new types of wallets can come around where you have multi-sig backup as like a default, or even multi-sig as the default, and use some sort of backup path in some other way.
Ken asks that he doesn't see any merchants anymore offering Bitcoin as a payment option. Who in the world would use Bitcoin for anything other than a store of value right now? And when do you think, or well, let me just put it this way, I'm going to edit it a little bit. What do you think needs to happen before Bitcoin can be used as a medium of exchange?
Well, so it is used at least on Lightning, right? There's like games and stuff. There's a lot of interesting applications of Lightning that are happening right now for not medium of exchange per se, but method of payment. And stuff like Strike and Escher, I think, are really exciting because they essentially allow you to use Lightning as a rail, Bitcoin as a rail.
Right.
So you can register your bank account, bank debit card, or your bank account onto the app, and you can pay someone with Lightning using those funds, and that's awesome because now you can you're using Bitcoin as a method of payment without even knowing that it's there. I suspect that as Bitcoin gets more popular, it'll just sort of get integrated into the current financial system. So somebody like, say, Cash App might settle in Bitcoin eventually, right? Like, so you owe me point something Bitcoin. But that probably won't happen until like Bitcoin's sort of taken over as a store of value first. Still, by far, the U.S. dollar is the store of value that most people use. For rich people, it's real estate or stocks. But anyone in a third world country, they want dollars, right? and that's how they store value.
Real quick note on strike. I do think it's really amazing. I think it can change the game, because now that the big thing that was keeping merchants from accepting Bitcoin is that there was just no demand for people to transact directly in Bitcoin. There's still relatively few of us who own Bitcoin, even fewer that work on Lightning or can operate on Lightning. But yeah, with Strike, Jack Mahler's new company or new product, people will be able to accept. If I'm a merchant, I can accept Bitcoin, and none of my customers have to know even what it is.
Yeah, and it brings a lot of holders into the game, right? Because
Right.
now every holder wants to sell their goods and services. Instead of having a very narrow audience of Bitcoin aware people, you have a much broader audience of anyone that has a bank account or a debit card, and that's really where you want to be. Is you want to hold, and you want to earn, and people that know about Bitcoin as a store of value, they want more Bitcoin. And instead of trading their dollars, if they can trade their labor, they'll do it in a second. Or if they can trade goods or services that they can create, that they'll do it in a second. That to me is a giant game changer. And I think that's the direction we're headed in. If as sort of like a middle step between it becoming sort of like a universal method of payment.
Yeah, and it solves the tax problem, which is also huge. So,
Yeah.
So thanks for doing all the taxes for everyone, Jack. All right, so let's talk a bit about the future. This is a question from Quad. He asks, what is the biggest risk to Bitcoin right now, existential risk, and what steps are or can be taken to mitigate that risk?
The biggest existential risk. I mean, it's pretty decentralized, so I don't think there's like a single thing that would take it down, but some combination of a bunch of core developers getting kidnapped, and some sort of state actor trying to attack the network, not caring about the cost of it from an economics perspective. Um, some sort of government regulation done sort of unilaterally all across the world at the same time. Some combination of that. I think Bitcoin can survive any one of those. Some combination would be pretty difficult. So I would say something like that.
Nice. And what about steps that can be taken to prevent those? I mean, just further decentralization and growing the network-based network users.
I think time is our best ally, and as Bitcoin grows, you have more people coming into it that are holders, and more people that are invested in it, and care about it. They're sort of like the immune system that's sort of spread out through the world that prevents these things. So like somebody might want to unilaterally do something. If you own Bitcoin, care about selling money, well, you're going to try to prevent them. Like from the inside or whatever. So, for example, there could be some tax law tomorrow that says, 100% of your crypto holdings now belong to the government. I mean, somebody in the government will, probably prevent that, because there's plenty of holders in government already. So, time, adoption, they're all on our side. It's the Lindy effect, right? We've been in existence 11 years. We'll probably be in existence at least, on average, another 11. But we get to 20, it's going to be like another 20. So it gets better with time.
Corey Clipson, our CEO, wrote a piece recently that was getting at the idea of the dictatorship of the minority, or the intransigent minority, the Taleb idea. And it's basically the idea that you establish a small minority of people, and then basically the idea becomes the majority, because just by kind of default, the idea of, or the example was, kosher food in the United States. A lot of food is kosher because a small number of people need it that way and demand it to be that way, and it's just easier for the companies just to make everything kosher instead of like having two product lines, right? So a similar idea would apply here. I think if we grow the hodler base, we have this intransigent minority, we have a lot of politicians in office, then just kind of becomes a lot harder to kill.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the same with a lot of other things, right? Gluten-free food now
Yeah.
and halal food and all
Yes.
sorts of things. So it will happen. I don't like that. That's an excellent way to look at things.
Yeah. All right. Joe asks, as Bitcoin continues to grow, what happens to trade between countries? Today, there's trade leverage based on the strength or weakness of sovereign fiat monies. So how would a single I guess non fluctuating or fixed monetary policy affect trade between countries?
Well, that's a really, really good question. So right now, I think a lot of people don't realize like trade deficits and things like that. Every time the U.S. has a trade deficit with somebody, they're essentially exporting inflation, right? So if you have like a trade deficit with China, for example, they're holding a bunch of your dollars, right? And they're having to devalue their labor and goods and services in order that the U.S. can get it. So that is an excellent question. So how will it affect that? Well, if you go back to the gold standard or La Belle Epoque, the golden age, as it were, pre-Fed from about 1880 to about 1910. That was the way of the world, right? It was literally no trade restrictions really because you had gold. I mean, you still had tariffs and things like that, but all currency was denominated in gold, so you knew exactly how much the British pound got you in gold. You knew exactly how much the U.S. dollar, Italian lira, and so on. And that's how it worked. So once we go back to that sort of thing, then trade becomes a lot more fair. Right now, it's heavily in favor of the United States and the Western world in general. I think
Yeah.
Europe too, because of the trade imbalances and like the monetary imperialism that the dollar hegemony like imposes on all these central banks. Essentially, if you're a central bank in any other country than maybe Europe and the United States and maybe Japan, you have to keep your currency in a very particular peg range to the dollar, more or less. And
Yeah.
if you don't do that and it gets too high, you're not going to be able to export anything. If it gets too low, then you're starting to inflate and you're on your way to hyperinflation and your currency is worth nothing and you can't import anything anyway. So trade has to be managed essentially by every central bank, and some of them do a bad job, which is why you end up with hyperinflation and so on. With a sound money that everyone's settling in, a global Bitcoin standard, you stop having that. Trade becomes a lot freer, a lot more fair. There's a lot better things that are built all around the world. Instead of sort of like the unfair globalization we have now, you have a much more fair globalization, and you have wealth flowing into some of these poor countries that have essentially had to feast at the crumbs of whatever the U.S. leaves behind and whatever deal that the U.S. gives them. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's I think an exciting prospect in the future.
All right. A question about quantum computing. It seems to be a popular one. Demetrios asks, will quantum computing of the future mark the end of Bitcoin and modern cryptography? And this has always been one of his fears, so he'd like to know.
No. I'm just kidding. I like that. I would just answer it that way, but this is like I'm so sick of this question because everyone thinks that that like quantum is something that's like just around the corner and it's going to happen tomorrow and everything will break and the world will go to hell or something like that. It's a form of doom porn, right? Like kind of like the coronavirus stuff that everyone's panicking about right now. It's a way for the media to make you more anxious about something when really it's not that big a deal. First of all, quantum computing is enormously difficult, and you do not understand how difficult it is from an engineering perspective until you actually dig into it. The state of matter that's required in order to do anything quantum is nano degrees above absolute zero. So all these atoms, all these qubits, all of the equipment that you have to do has to be cooled down to some insane levels, right? Which is very, very difficult. And you have to keep them there, and you have to put them through quantum gates, and you have to do all this other stuff. And you can only observe one thing, and the rest of the state of everything else sort of freezes at that point. It's very, very slow, right? And that's one of the things that you have to understand. The entanglement, there's entanglement. There's also like sort of like sort of atoms like disintegrating. There's like half-lives to these things. So you have to error correct in a massive way. So you know, getting that many qubits together, I think for breaking ECDSA, it's in the order of thousands. It's like any quantum physicist that you speak to, they're like, yeah, like there's no way we know how to do any of that. And you know, this is the sort of same hype around like cold fusion, like back in the 1980s or 1990s. You know, like the media made it sound like you can have free energy for the rest of your life, you know, and that's just right around the corner. You know, you talk to any actual physicist that knows about that stuff, and they'll tell you it's not happening in my lifetime, right? Like there's no way. Like it's just so complicated, and like the level of engineering that you need to get there is just, we're nowhere near that. It's similar with quantum computing. Now, say something like that happened, okay? Like I told you at least some of the engineering challenges as I've understood them, and there's a lot more than that, guys. Like just so many different things that are just incredibly difficult. You know, we have trouble like putting up websites or keeping them out alive. Like think like many orders of difficulty, many orders of magnitude more difficult than something like that. You know, even if it came around, there are quantum safe algorithms that you can soft fork into Bitcoin, and you know that would be a way to do it. But like just like people like you need to understand this is panic incited by the popular media, and the popular media just does not understand anything. And they like to give you clickbaity headlines about how quantum is this and that or whatever. You know, and you know, Vitalik's one of the more famous people that has you know, like tried to scam people using this. He was trying to do a quantum computing startup before going into Ethereum and so on. But this is snake oil, right? Like it's like the only reason like some of these companies are even like trying anything is that it sounds cool, and then they start looking into it and start trying it, and they discover, oh crap, this is really, really hard. And like the companies that are involved in it, you know, they have an incentive to make it seem like they're succeeding, but the actual engineering, if you look at it, it's like ridiculously basic. And it's like you're asking about, what if we have a spaceship that can go faster than the speed of light right now? Wouldn't that destroy all manner of, you know, I don't know, like anything related to time or something like that? It's a hypothetical. It's a very low probability hypothetical. There are much more, you know, worrisome things for Bitcoin, like say like an inflation bug or something like that, that are way more probable. So please put that out of your mind. You're muted.
Haas asks,
you're muted again. You're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, my mute button is sticky. Okay, so Haas asks, and I think you know who which Haas this is when you hear the question. Why do you think there has been so much resistance to the auto DCA movement, that's dollar cost averaging or buying on a recurring basis? Or why fiat on-ramps will spend dev effort to implement, not spend dev effort to implement auto DCA despite spending that dev time on supporting altcoins?
Well, it depends on who you're talking about, right? Like for exchanges, they want to support altcoins because they get more trading volume. And
right.
And really they're not serving holders, they're serving traders. The traders make up a vast majority of their volume, and they make all their money from traders. So it behooves them to serve who their customers are. Now, if we had more companies that were not exchanges, but sort of like help you hodl kind of places, then they would be much more motivated to do stuff like dollar cost averaging. I think there are several companies that are going down that road. I think River Financial and some others, and even Give Bitcoin, right? Like it's much more towards helping you hold money rather than helping you trade, and it's a different audience. Traders are a big part of Bitcoin. Obviously, there's a lot of them, and they speculate and do all sorts of other things, and cause price movements. But they also provide liquidity. But at the same time, like it's a different audience, and you can't. The incentives aren't necessarily there for exchanges to allow for that sort of thing unless they change their business model or who their target audience is.
All right, Lucas asks, in your article, Why ICOs Are Broken, you mention Ethereum as another rent seeker's pyramid scheme, as many other altcoins, or all other altcoins. He says, however, I think Ethereum is not precisely what you said. It has its own purpose and environment. So my question is basically, apart from Bitcoin, don't you think Ethereum and DeFi try to eliminate rent seekers?
No, no, no. The whole point of Ethereum at one point, anyway, was ICOs, right? It was to get people to print their own money, and the rent seeking from Ethereum holders was that in order to invest in this ICO, you had to send Ethereum in there, right? And that was the rent seeking aspect. So they were rent seeking off of all of these other people that wanted to print their own money. So they were rent seeking off of rent seekers, basically. So yeah, I mean that's why I called it a rent seeker's paradise, because you are not only rent seeking, like Vitalik wasn't just rent seeking off of the Ethereum people, but the Ethereum people were rent seeking off of the ICO people, and the ICO people were rent seeking off of whoever they can deceive into investing in their funds. So I mean, DeFi is a centralized piece of crap, and it's basically another central bank, right? Like the way DeFi works is that you lock up some Ethereum and get something that's supposed to be pegged to the dollar. And in order to do that, what MakerDAO and a lot of these other things have to do is keep that peg range on that token, and they do it in a synthetic way. They don't back it with actual dollars. They do it by market manipulation, and they basically put like, it's crazy, but MakerDAO has a bunch of DAI that on different exchange accounts that support the DAI to keep that peg range, right? So they whenever it goes above $1, they sell more of their token. Whenever it goes below $1, they buy more of it, and that's how they keep the peg range. This is exactly what a central bank does, and that's what DeFi is. It's actually not decentralized at all. It should be centralized bank on Ethereum or something like that. C bank. I don't know.
So Pam, that should answer your question as well. Is it safe to get a DeFi loan? Proceed at your own risk. Take caution. Okay.
I mean, yeah. There are so many ways it can break, and so many ways in which it's centralized. Like the government can go and arrest Vitalik Buterin and say you have to shut down every DeFi contract on your platform and hard fork them away or something, and he'd have to comply more or less. So it's
I mean, if it's centralized anyway, then just go to your bank, your local bank, get a loan.
Yeah, and you'll get better rates anyway. Like,
exactly.
I mean, there are Ethereum lending services that will give you better rates than DeFi. It's it's crazy to me that people think that this is something safe.
One more altcoin question from Nako. He asks, What are your thoughts about projects that anchor their projects to Bitcoin for security purposes, but still issue a token to run their smart contracts? For instance, Blockstack's proof of burn and proof of transfer protocol and the STX token.
Yeah, I mean, I think Blockstack is a scam. I mean, like, they're so incredibly centralized. Like, I wrote in my newsletter a few weeks ago about how they stopped their developer incentive program. So they had a developer incentive program, and they were paying out like hundreds of thousands of dollars every single month in STX tokens and BTC as a way to like incentivize people to build on their platform, because they couldn't get any developers to actually want to develop on their platform. So they had to bribe them. And they stopped this bribing scheme because it wasn't really working. They got like super basic apps, and the community, and they gained the vote so that the people that won or got the money were essentially did very little work, added very little value, and they got a ton of money. So they stopped it. They also like locked up a ton of their tokens like at the beginning. Like the money that they raised through an ICO, they raised a ton of it. And they trying to have some integrity, I guess. They put out some metrics for them to meet before some of that was unlocked for their company. And one of those metrics was 1 million users on Blockstack. And they announced like a month ago that they hit that mark. And I'm like, what? There's no way there's 1 million people on Blockstack. Well, it turns out that they basically gamed that too. They said it's 1 million users registered. And you can do that en masse, right? Like they're not identified in any way, so anyone can go in there and put in 500,000 database records essentially on their database. So I mean, I don't know to what extent they're anchoring, but I see them as pretty scammy. So, I mean, like usually the CEOs of these companies will say good things about Bitcoin, hoping that like maximalists will be like me, will be nice to them. But I mean, I like if you really wanted to build a product, then do it with Bitcoin, right? Like it doesn't make any sense to go issue your own money, other than that it makes you rich. If you you can either be rich, or you can have a good reputation and not be condemned for trying to be rich. You can't have both. It's having your cake and eating it too. They've chosen to eat their cake, so they can't have it. Sorry.
Okay, so you wrote an article about this yesterday, and Willie asked this question, I guess probably before you published this article, but he asks, what happened to Trace Mayer?
I'm not sure. I mean, like I've known him for a while. He was an investor at Armory, and that's where I was, like back in 2015, 2016. But like basically at Unconfiscatable, his behavior was to a large degree inexplicable, because he was shilling Mimble coin to everybody. But then I looked at his past videos since like November, and he's been shilling MWC everywhere he went.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's not even a very good coin. Like it's a clone of Grin with a 50% pre-mine. It doesn't make any sense. And they had like this hack with like basically their wallet couldn't recognize 51% attacks, and the exchange got screwed over for like 90,000 MWC, something like that. So it's a lot of money that's at risk, that like their developers seem to not know what they're doing. So for him to back that, I don't know what happened. All I know is that he was shilling it. He was shilling it to me in particular too. And he was shilling it to a lot of other people, and he's been shilling it for a while. So I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of tragic, but I don't really know why.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, because we do have some relatively people who are relatively new to Bitcoin out there, Trace Mayer has been around for a long time Bitcoiner, has done a lot of educational effort about Bitcoin, and was very much a Bitcoin-only advocate for a very long time. And a pre-mine, the definition of pre-mine is basically you create some money and you keep a bunch of it yourself, and then you sell some to make make your money value, then typically it gets dumped on the people who bought in order to make some money. So that's why Jimmy's calling them a scam. All right, a couple more questions left for you. Carrie asks, if she wants to get into mining, how much does it cost, and how much work is it? Is it something that I can do at home?
Well, so this is the usual journey of anyone that gets into Bitcoin, and
Yep.
this is something that I've observed over and over again. So I'm guessing Carrie is fairly new to Bitcoin. Typically, what happens is you find out about Bitcoin, you find out about the 21 million limit, and almost like instinctually you go, okay, I need to get some, right? Like this is a very natural reaction, and then you go, okay, how can I get some? I can either spend my money or I can spend my labor. All right, let's try to go spend my labor. All right, there's this thing called mining. Let's see if I can go do it. And then you discover that mining is actually really, really expensive and not very profitable. And that economically speaking, it makes very little sense unless you happen to be really good at manufacturing, really good at sourcing very cheap power, really good at managing a very large facility. So vast majority of mining that's done out there today is in data centers with professional people that know how to manage this equipment, that use stuff like liquid cooling to get the absolute most out of the miners that they run, and so on. So if you want to get into that game, go for it, but it's going to take a lot of expertise that honestly most people don't have. I would equate it to something like, okay, I want to get into digging for gold. How do I dig for gold? Well, you can go dig in your backyard and you might find atoms of gold in there, but it's probably a waste of your time, right? Like whatever you're good at, you should probably go and earn money and use that towards Bitcoin. That's probably the best way. And this is something about sound money that we've lost over the years, which is that with fiat money, you can put in comparatively less effort and make a lot of money, right? Like this is why so many people get into investment banking, not because they're talented at that particular skill, but because the rewards are just so outsized compared to the amount of skill involved. If you get into investment banking and you go climb up the ladder, you're going to make hundreds of millions, probably billions of dollars, like doing something that doesn't really add much value at all. And this is why I call them rent seekers, because they're essentially rent seeking off newly printed money.
Yeah.
And when you prevent that with something like sound money, well, now you have an incentive to because mining is hard, and it's supposed to be hard. If it wasn't hard, then everyone would be doing it. I mean, that's just reality. And in the early days, more or less everyone was, but that's no longer the case. If you were just if you happen to be very good at it, right? Like there are gold miners around the world that know how to process dirt, that know all the chemical processes, that can source all the labor and components and technologies needed to go mine gold. But that's a very specialized skill, and it's, unless you happen to be very, very good at it, as in like top 100 people in the world that know how to do this stuff, then I wouldn't go that way, right? Like instead, you have your own talents, your own skills, your own things that you know how to do that can make money. And if you want Bitcoin, the best use of your time is to provide goods and services for everybody else. And this is the beauty of a sound money system, is that everyone is incentivized to do what they're best at to sort of add to humanity. And in doing so, you not only benefit yourself by getting yourself more Bitcoin, but you're benefiting everybody else, because by definition, whatever good or product that you're putting out there is better, cheaper, more convenient, or in some way better than what's out there in the market today. And as a result, you're making everyone's lives easier or better or more convenient or something. And this is how civilization grows. This is how everything gets built.
Yeah, and I think that analogy that you brought up to gold obviously is a really good one, and that was the analogy that the creators of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, had in mind when you're creating some money. And I think if you go back to 150 years ago, you could go out with a pan and sift it through a river and find some gold. Now it's an incredibly industrialized process, and the same thing happened with Bitcoin. 9, 10 years ago, you could just use a CPU on an average computer, a laptop, and mine Bitcoin. It's become an industry now, and if you just Google Bitcoin mining industry or something, you'll see a lot of videos and pictures about what these things look like out there. So
yeah, and not only that, like remember, like the people back then, like in the 49ers and the people that went out and dug for gold or whatever, they didn't make any money, right? They ended up like actually like going with a bunch of other people, and you usually had to like pool your resources, kind of like mining pools today. But they actually made very little money, and they had a hard life. The people that made the money, well, they were the people that were providing shovels, that were barbers, that were that opened saloons, or had grocery stores or made bread. Those are the people that really made the money, because there was such a large demand for that out in the West. And really that's what you should be thinking about if you want to get into Bitcoin at all, is what services can I provide to other people that are in this industry. That's where the profit, and like this part of why I wear the hat, right? It's
yeah.
Bitcoin is in many ways the Wild West. It's a land of opportunity, a lot of danger involved, but there's a lot of things that you can do that like there's just a demand for a lot of different skills that isn't say in sort of like the traditional finance system, right? Like there's a lot of accountants that know how to take care of your 401k or whatever. There aren't a lot of accountants that know anything about Bitcoin, right? And or how to treat it, or all the ways in which you can do that stuff. So like this is the land of, if you're thinking in terms of, okay, where's the opportunity here and how can I profit off of this? Don't think about mining per se. Think about all of the services around that, what people are going to need. And a lot of people have been very successful figuring that out and making money off of it.
Yeah. All right. So let's wrap up with this. Like I said, we've got through Give Bitcoin, we've got quite a few new people to Bitcoin. Bitcoiners are giving Bitcoin to their family and friends. It's maybe the first time they've received Bitcoin. We're launching a product soon called Swan Bitcoin. It's going to allow those people hopefully to kind of transition into investing on their own in a very easy way. So what advice do you have for people who are coming into Bitcoin to maybe help them avoid some of the mistakes we Bitcoiners have made in the past?
Yeah, so as I was saying about like sort of the typical journey that people take, you look at, usually the first step is, I need to get some Bitcoin. Second step is, I want to look at mining. And then you discover that like it doesn't make any sense. And then usually the third step is, all right, let's go look at these altcoins. Maybe they're just as good. And that's the temptation that that I would really like to help people get over, because Bitcoin is different than everything else. And you're going to discover this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is actually learning it on your own. The hard way is getting absolutely wrecked in the altcoin market. The liquidity is just not there, guys. And if you think you're going to like 10x your money and that you're going to be a genius, you're going to feel like one for maybe 10 minutes. And then you're going to get wrecked, or your reputation's going to go to hell, or you're going to lose your soul trying to do that. And many people have. Just stick with Bitcoin, and it'll be much easier. And remember, it's a store of value. A lot of people get in for sort of like the quick gains or whatever, and stay for what they recognize as something that's actually really revolutionary, that can really change the world. So the quicker you turn into a hodler, in other words, the better it will be for you, and the more profit you will make in the end. And that's that like just like I tell people, like, is like whenever they ask me, is it a good time to buy Bitcoin, and I go, I don't know. Well, what's your time horizon? If you're going to sell in 6 months after it doubles or halves, then don't bother, because then you're just gambling. Just go to a roulette table and do it right now, and that's much easier. But if you're looking for store value, well, lock it up for 5 years. Then, yeah, it's a good time to buy. Any time's a good time to buy. In Bitcoin's history, if you've held for 5 years, you've never lost money, and that's the truth. And so that's the way you have to kind of approach it. And the quicker you get into that mentality, and that's something that we try to sort of push a little bit in the Little Bitcoin book. I'll probably want to come out with another book that emphasizes that a little more. But going in that direction will help you a lot more than trying to altcoin or trying to make money quickly. It's a long game, and that's how you have to think of it.
Yep, absolutely. Agree with everything there. Great advice for you new coiners out there. Welcome to Bitcoin. This is where the game is. Stay here, stick with us. We'll teach you what's going on. All right, man. I really appreciate your time, and we'll see you out there on Bitcoin Twitter and out at the conferences, on the conference scene and everything. Appreciate you coming on and sharing some knowledge, man.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun.